Did you hear that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I want to say good afternoon to Leslie Coleman, who has agreed to sit down and have a community conversation with us about COVID-19 and try to get from her perspective, her thoughts and feelings and fears about the different things that's going on. But before we get started, Leslie, I would just like to say to the public that you come to the table with a social worker's cap, an advanced certified prevention specialist cap, a program director's cap where you have several employees that work under you, working in the community in the mental health field for many years. So you are coming to our table with a variety and expanded amount of experience. So thank you for taking the time out of your day today to share with us.
And thank you for the invitation, Toy.
Okay, so we're going to start off with something pretty easy. It really isn't. So I'm going to ask you, in your opinion, Leslie, what do you think are the main concerns or fears as to why people aren't getting their vaccines?
I think there are a couple that just come to the top of my head. Um, I think people are not being vaccinated because there's a mistrust of our government. I think when you go to get vaccinated, they ask for some very personal information. Houston and the surrounding areas have a lot of undocumented individuals, and I think that they are mistrusting of the government, and they're wondering what will be how that information will be used. I also think that we have a history of some of being used in experimental situations. And I think that piece of it is still, I think the pandemic really brought that again to the forefront. And again, people don't trust the government. I think the media tells us what they want us to hear. And so I just think there's really a mistrust amongst communities about what is really going on. I think this pandemic did start off and it exploded before our very eyes. And I feel like it was in crisis mode before we were made aware of it. And when we were made aware of it, people were dying.
Okay, and do you think that maybe inconvenience could play a role into why people aren't getting vaccinated? People may not have transportation or
Definitely, definitely. I feel like we should have put mobile units in place immediately so people could get tested. Everybody doesn't have access to public transportation. They don't have cars. They don't have places in their communities where they can get tested. And so that makes it really difficult. You know, you also have kids at home where you just, you know, you can't necessarily always take your whole family to get tested when you don't have someone at home to watch them.
that's
And
right.
so I think, you know, and I really felt like mobile units should have been put in place where we were going to the communities to serve these people. You know, I just can't say enough how we should have been going to them instead of making them come to us. And I will say from personal experience, it was difficult for me to get tested because you have to make an appointment, you have to go to the website, you have to do all these things. Some people don't have access to technology. And it was difficult for me. And so I can imagine how difficult it is for someone who doesn't have the technology or the education or knowledge to work through all the kinks that you have to do just to go get an appointment.
Yeah, and you bring up some wonderful points, Leslie, because you're absolutely right. And when you're thinking about the older generation who don't get around as easily, And it could be a matter of inconvenience, but also a lot of places today are requiring you to register online. And not only is grandmom or grandpa or auntie and uncle not computer literate or technology literate, a lot of the kids are not that literate as well. Sure, they know how to use the chat apps and all that, but when it comes to registering on the line online for these vaccines, there can be they can be inconvenienced as well. So you bring up some good points. I want to talk more a little bit about the fact that some people aren't getting vaccinated because of maybe from a generational point of view, they were told about the experiments such as Tuskegee and how certain cultures or races were used as guinea pigs, and as a result have chosen to opt out. So you bring up several good points there of not getting the vaccine. So what other messages do you think are being passed down from one generation to the next about getting vaccinated?
I think, a lot of my thoughts are around the not trusting or not educating generations about some of the things that have happened in the past. So we can talk to people and tell them about the Tuskegee experiment, but I would like to ask a child, if somebody tells you about the Tuskegee, if you hear that word, do you really know what happened? And I think part of it is you're just hearing that. And like you just said, the experiment they did on individuals, but do we really know what that looked like? Do other generations know? And that's a perfect opportunity to educate. And we have the internet. We can look all that up, and yes, it's true. It's facts. I mean, that's not something we just made up. And so that's just one of the many experiments that they used humans for. And so that is I think that's a huge deterrent. I think, we've heard all kind of things. They're putting a chip in us. They don't have to put a chip in you to track you.
Right.
In this world, they can track you without a chip. And so I also, I have fears, and I'll be the first to say I have fears about what the long-term impact. I was very hesitant to get vaccinated, I'll be honest, because I don't know, COVID-19 is not new. This is something that happened years ago in China, and they didn't talk about it here in the United States. And all of a sudden they didn't have a vaccine, and then all of a sudden they did have a vaccine. And so it really made me hesitate. And honestly, I was vaccinated because of my family and how, I've lost some people through COVID. But for my family and I felt like I was doing it for the greater good of communities, because I also don't want to get COVID and I don't want to spread COVID unknowingly. And so I think it's real important the messages that we are handing down are researched and talked about more so that people can form different opinions and ask questions. I don't think we ask enough questions. Generations will say, well, this happened 30, 40 years ago, but you never follow up on it. You never follow up on the Tuskegee experiment. There was an Agent Orange experiment they did, but people aren't following up. And I think we are in a society now where we can educate our younger generations, and we should educate our younger generations. And, there's always a pro and con to everything. And people really need to, when they make a choice, they need to make an informed decision.
Very good. So I think what I hear you saying is we need to be upfront we need to be more factual with the information to eliminate some of the fears and discomfort that people are having. The more honest information we have about the vaccine, the more informed we can, the more informed we become to make a better decision.
Yes, and this is a perfect example because there will be another COVID-19. It might not be called COVID-19, but even with COVID-19, there are many variants going around now. And now, the big thing is monkeypox. I mean, there's always going to be something else. And so we need to use these opportunities to educate.
Okay, so I hear what you're saying. So what more can the doctors, the physicians, the primary care people, the religious leaders, what more can they do to educate the public?
I don't necessarily feel that is their primary job. I feel like we need to educate ourselves. I don't believe that just because you're a doctor and an MD, you can tell me everything about me because you're not me. You don't know those symptoms I'm feeling. I can describe them, but I don't, even with my own doctors, I don't take their word or everything. I go in and ask questions. If I know I have a doctor's appointment, I know what's wrong, and I go in and ask questions because everybody knows you're in there maybe 30 minutes. And if that, and the thing I tell people is, you're not designated 20 minutes. Go in there and find out what you need to know and come out where you're more informed or you're more comfortable with what they say. Because a lot of it is, we're dealing with people, not computers. Everybody's different. Everybody has their own ideas. Doctors have their own ideas. The church has their own ideas. Everybody has their own ideas. But I feel like individuals need to make a choice, an informed choice, because when I make a decision for myself, I make decisions where I know I can live with whatever consequence it is.
Yeah, so people really have got to feel comfortable asking questions.
Yes.
They've got to feel comfortable. And if you think about it, from one generation to the next generation, the level of comfort in terms of asking questions is just now dissipating. The older generation would be happy with listening to what people say and not challenging or questioning. But now, with the invention of the computer and all these websites, and not saying everything that's on these websites are true factual information, but it gives us a lot more room, a lot more information where we can choose to ask more questions. Is this true? Is this a fact or is this fiction? And so you, meaning society, meaning people, meaning our culture, have got to feel comfortable asking questions. And I will say this, in my opinion, one of the things with our culture, with the African American culture, is that for many, many years, we just took what people said as fact, and we didn't dare question. Now, when you go back years and years ago, they didn't give us the right to question, but now we do. And we have to question. It's our health, it's our mental health as well. And we've got to feel comfortable asking those questions.
Right. And I think that puts a level of fear in some people's mind that now they're asking questions.
Yeah.
They're asking questions they have every right to ask.
Yeah. Yeah. And so you're absolutely right. So very good. So can you share, if any, the impact that COVID has had on your world personally, your friends, family, anything?
I think it has been I mean, I feel like I have been one of the luckier people because I do say some of my family has had COVID. I have not lost any of my family to COVID. Um, I feel like I got vaccinated for my family and for the community. I did not want it. But I also have family now who has been vaccinated and boosted and have COVID today. They have COVID today. And so that, and then I asked myself, I was hesitant to get vaccinated for this very reason, because I'm like, now, do you need another booster? Do you need another booster? I have been very fortunate to not ever have had COVID. I take precautions when I can, but it's still very on the front of my thinking. I know COVID is still out there. And so I have seen people. I've lost a childhood friend from COVID, and she had it. She thought it was a sinus infection. And I'm telling you right now, even if I have a cold or feel down, COVID is the first thing on my mind. And I was amazed that she did not go to her doctor to get COVID tested. When she finally went to the hospital, she was in cardiac arrest. That's how bad she let it get. And she had been sick for several days. And so and I don't know the circumstances of why she waited. I don't have that information. But for the good of my family, and I think many families that have lost family members from COVID, I think it's devastating. It's devastating to families. I think and I don't feel like people could grieve properly because you couldn't have a funeral, the traditional funeral. There were limitations on saying goodbye to that person. A lot of people died alone in a hospital with
Right.
only hospital personnel.
Right.
And I think that is devastating, and you don't have that closure or get to say those goodbyes or get to help that person transition, and I can only imagine how difficult that will be for someone in the hospital where you are not, you can't be surrounded by family and friends because of this pandemic. So I think it's been devastating on all cultures.
Absolutely. And I think I have shared with you previously that I'm in Texas and my sister lives in New Jersey. And she was diagnosed with COVID, and she was in the hospital for almost a week on death's bed. And so you can imagine what it does to the family that's immediately around her, but also to the family that's 3,000 miles away that cannot get to her, whether it's through phones or whatever, being there in person. So not only is it devastating for the people who are near her in terms of watching her and going through this physical aspect, but also the mental aspect that's involved. And we didn't know whether my sister was going to live and die or die from 1 minute to the next. And when she was able to finally make a connection with all of us, she was only able to talk. She was only able to talk for 1 minute at a time because she was unable to breathe properly and still catch her breath. And even now, she's been out of the hospital for almost a year, and she's still using oxygen.
And I think that, what you said, two things that I wanted to respond to. One is, I think healing, when you're sick, being around family and friends or having them to come visit you, I think that helps in the healing process. I think that's huge. And when you don't have that, sometimes you do lose the will to live. And then you touched on something else, Toy, the after effects of COVID. And she's on oxygen, but through her healing and her recovery, I'm sure she needed extra help. that's another layer that family has to come through and get ready. And yet you still can't quite get close to that person to help them like you want to because COVID is still there.
Exactly.
And so that
Exactly.
it's devastating on many levels.
Exactly. You're absolutely right. So let me throw out this question to you, Leslie. How do you deal with a family that half of them are boosted and the other half are not?
At the peak of the pandemic, Toy, honestly, I would not travel. I would not go visit my family out of town. I would not, because for one, I don't want to be subjected to the possibility of getting COVID, and I don't want to spread it if I do have it. But separate during the peak of the pandemic, I honestly, in my heart, would have told my family they cannot come over if you are not vaccinated. I would not have, because to lose a family for that, I mean, it's their choice not to be vaccinated. That is their choice. And I respect that and I honor that. But it's also my choice not to allow you to come over. We can FaceTime, we can do Zoom, we can do whatever it is, but I'm not willing to take that risk. And I feel like if they decide not to get vaccinated, that's part of the choice they're making, is not to come see me or me to see them.
Okay. So
And I respect that.
absolutely. Absolutely. So how do you think the isolation from the pandemic has impacted our mental health?
I think it has had a huge impact on mental health. And I think we're probably hearing more about mental health and mental health treatment and mental health help. And they just instituted this new suicide prevention, the suicide hotline. I think our life is about relationships. If you cannot have relationships, you're going to struggle. If you were dealing with mental illness before the pandemic, it only escalated that. I think we also probably saw some mental health that was being managed just by the ability of people to be connected to other people. Sometimes you can manage mental illness when you can have some sort of normalcy. When that is changed, then you change with it. And I feel like a lot of people dealt with anxiety. I felt like a lot of families really, we love our families, but we don't necessarily want to be with them 24/7.
Right.
And I think that came to light during the pandemic. I mean, parents became teachers, which is not their role. Mothers and fathers became teachers when they're used to being workers.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that piece was, it really raised emotions. There was more domestic violence during this time. There was more drug use during this time. There was more alcohol use this time. I cannot even imagine whatever all the other things that were increased during this time of togetherness. And the thing is, I mean, we weren't prepared for that. If we had had some notice that the pandemic's coming for you and we had some time to prep and, get some things in place, but that didn't happen. It was just like a bomb, literally a bomb was dropped on us. And I will never forget, it was March 13th when all this, it was like on the 16th, it's like, don't come back to work. I mean, it just stopped just like that. And I think nobody thought that could happen. And it's like, you can't go outside, you can't do this, you can't do that. And that is really impactful when you're dealing with a mental health situation. You can't see your therapist. We didn't have a lot of telehealth on the records before the pandemic. Now it's really on the books and probably will never go away now. But you do not have that ability to connect with other people. What if you don't have FaceTime? What if you don't have any way to connect with your family, to check in with your family? What if you don't have those things? dealing with households who already were stressed. And now we have to school at home and we have one computer and we have 4 kids. I mean, that, all those things, create more things. And we just weren't prepared for it. And I think it has had a devastating effect on mental health. Most mental health, community mental health centers probably have a waiting list, because I think this pandemic raised the level of some mental illness and probably created some mental illness.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then when you put on top of that layer, there were a lot of people who lost their employment.
Yes.
Not only were parents having to become teachers, then you had people who lost their livelihood on top of that stress. And you're absolutely right.
Yeah, restaurants were shutting down. That was like, you can't go back to work at that restaurant what you're used to. You have to start over.
Yes.
And then those that were essential workers, you're scared to death that you're going to get COVID by trying to respond to someone's emergency.
Exactly. Exactly. And so I still think that part of our society is still in that panic bubble from that pandemic. That's why, look, you have people who have applied for the tested home kits. When they get a cough, that's the first thing they do. Pull out one of those test home kits and test themselves.
And one of my questions is, why didn't we have those in our hands at the peak of pandemic?
Exactly.
I mean, I just got my other eight test kits. I mean, and it's like, why weren't these in our hands?
Right.
Why is it 2 years later and we're just getting these? Those are the things I say the government could have gotten in place sooner rather than later.
And with the uptick that I keep talking about, they are still trying to put things in place, but they are encouraging people to order the at-home test kits, and not everybody's doing it. Just like, what do you think about people who are making the choice? A huge percentage are choosing not to wear masks when they go out. And I'm not talking about having a picnic outside. I'm talking about going into, let's say, a store, grocery store, the mall, going to
nightclubs.
Nightclubs.
I mean, really.
Yeah. So what do you think about that?
It disappoints me, because I don't think we are, but then again, that's why I say we have to make educated choices. I wear my mask in the store. I try to go to the store when there are fewer people, like first thing in the morning. I can only be responsible for me. When you don't have a mask on, I socially distance from you. I try to go down aisles that are not packed with people, but I have to respect their decision. I don't agree with it, but I have to respect it.
But you see how this pandemic continues to have an impact on our personal lives. Going to the store at an earlier hour where it's not so populated, going down an aisle that doesn't have as many people, making the choice not to go to, let's say, church, because the spaces are not being observed correctly. So it continues to have an impact on our personal lives as well.
Yes, and I think it will have an impact on our lives for years to come.
I agree with that.
It will have an impact on years to come. And we will, I know I will do things differently just because of this. When somebody coughs, I try to not be around that person. I mean, when I cough, sometimes you just cough. I mean, and I usually I'll put my face down in my shirt because I don't want anybody to look at me. But I really do try to be respectful of other people. And I wish people would realize, I wish they put back in the media and on the news these numbers of people, the lives we're losing. I always have felt that if I feel like we're a very visual people. And if they had shown us the stacks of bodies that were lost during COVID, or when we go to war and the dead bodies come back, that should be on the news so people can see what an impact this is taking on our society.
Yes, you're
But that would
absolutely
be,
right.
but that would be too much. That would be too much, and so they don't do it.
Yeah, but there is, like you said, there's a huge difference in hearing that over 1 million people have now passed away from COVID here in the United States versus seeing the bodies, the graves of hundreds of people. So it's a huge difference. And the impact, like you said, can or could have been huge. Could have
Yes.
been huge. So I agree. I agree with all that. So what are your takeaways from this experience over the last 2+ years with COVID-19 and the variants that are sprouting up every time you turn around?
I'm a person that expects the unexpected. If somebody had told me this world can never shut down, I would truly have told them, sure it can. Under the right circumstances, everything can shut down. And so and I think that's why I'm not, I just take it in stride. I'm like, anything can happen. We as a society think that these things can't happen. And I think this has shown us that it can happen. And there's a possibility it can happen again. With the new strains, I don't know what the next strain is going to come out. Now if we are moving to monkeypox, what do we know about monkeypox? What do we know about the next shoe that's going to drop? And so I just have to roll with it, Toy. Honestly, I think it has changed my life forever and how I look at life. Not so much as I would never have expected it, but now I can say, okay, this can happen and I can expect something else.
And to be as prepared as you can be and to do what you can do to at least limit your exposure to everything that's happening and coming at us.
Right, which is sad because it puts such limitations on, even our kids, our kids and their relationships. And I always say with technology, we've already separated ourselves from face-to-face communication. And I think this is another level of it, that we will not have that face-to-face communication or some babies, all they know is people in masks.
Yes.
That's all they know. That is their normal. So when people don't have their mask on, they're like, oh, why don't they have their mask on? And so we don't really think about all those kind of things that, I have granddaughters, and I think, when they started talking about vaccinating the kids, I was not for vaccinating the kids. I'll be honest, because I don't know what long-term effects it will have on my grandchildren. And I don't know that there's been enough research to tell me what the long-term effects are. But they have been vaccinated.
Good.
Their parents vaccinated them, and it hasn't changed anything that it has not changed anything about me or my thoughts. It's my opinion, and I'm entitled to it. And I respect their parents for doing what they thought was in the best interest of their children.
Absolutely, Grandma. You need to take a step back.
I did. I did. I know when to get back in my lane.
There you go. There you go. Well, you have absolutely just been wonderful.
Thank you.
And I want to thank you for coming to my project today and talking about the COVID-19 project and sharing your thoughts with us. Do you have any parting thoughts you'd like to share?
I don't have any parting thoughts. I do want to thank you for this interview. And as people listen to it, I just hope that it gives them a different, I always say, whatever you hear, learn something from it. Take something away, good or bad, but I always encourage people to take something away, and we are all going to form our own opinion. But I want to thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to share my thoughts with the community.
Thank you, Les. I'm going to
Okay.
stop the recording